What's your favorite title for a poem? There are a lot of unique ones. Probably one of mine is a poem by William Wordsworth. And the title is, get ready for it, Lines Written a Few Miles from Tintern Abbey on Revisiting the Banks of the Wye during a tour July 13th, 1798. Now, we've been talking about romanticism here on the channel, and we've been pretty big picture so far. But I want to look at this poem in particular as a good example of the kind of really well-constructed, lasting poetry that comes out of this romantic movement. I'm reading from Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which was published soon after the writing of this poem in 1798. And as we've talked about in previous videos, this is kind of the foundational text of British Romanticism, especially in Romantic poetry. Let's look at the opening section of this poem. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a sweet inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs, which on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season, with their unripe fruits, among the woods and copses lose themselves, nor, with their green and simple hue, disturb the wild green landscape. Once again, I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild. These pastoral farms, green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees, with some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. Though absent long, these forms of beauty have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities I have owed to them in hours of weariness sensations sweet. I'm going to pause there. That's actually in the middle of a sentence, but I think it gives you a sense for what the first section of this poem does. Now, the opening stanza starts with 5 years have passed, and it's about 20 or more lines down to the hermit sits alone, and then we have a little break, and then it moves on to the next stanza with, though absent long, these forms of beauty have not been to me, as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. So what's going on in the opening section of this poem? Well, we have Wordsworth kind of showing off his descriptive powers and kind of giving his audience what they expect from a romantic poem. This poem is at the end of Lyrical Ballads, and so people who have been reading through it have a taste for, okay, Wordsworth and Coleridge, they describe these beautiful natural scenes. Maybe they'll end up being tragic scenes, maybe they'll be happy scenes, maybe they'll be wistful scenes, but these kind of natural scenes, this is what is going to be given to us in these poems. And so Wordsworth gives the audience what they want, maybe in the best language he musters up in the whole of Lyrical Ballads. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. And again, I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with sweet inland murmur. Once again do I behold the steep and lofty cliffs, which on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. Wonderful. So he's engaging 2 of our senses, first our hearing and then our sight, with these natural sensations. First of all, there's the sound of water, and then there's the beholding the steep and lofty cliffs, which on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion. It's It's interesting. We see the cliffs, and then we move inward to the thoughts. And that's something that's important to Wordsworth in Preface to Lyrical Ballads, that when we experience nature, it connects with the thoughts and sentiments that are already built up inside of us, and they resonate with those. And so we see cliffs and a wild landscape, and it resonates with our ideas of seclusion, of quiet, of aloneness, which may, in fact, connect to even more profound thoughts of, the human condition, who we are as humans. This was important to Wordsworth, as we've talked about before, that we learn from nature about ourselves. We can gain ethical and philosophical and even religious lessons from just going out in nature and observing. But all of this is couched in an interesting kind of narrative context. If it was just, hey, I hear some waters, I see some cliffs, I have some thoughts about solitude, okay, that would be fine. But it's couched within a narrative that is a memory of the past connected to the present. So he says 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear. So this is I am coming back. And if we remember the title, which, let's remind ourselves, is Lines Written a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey on Revisiting the Banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13th, 1798, we're revisiting. I was there 5 years ago. I'm back now. I see and hear these things and maybe think these thoughts that I've heard and seen before. And so it's a reflection on returning, a reflection on memory as much as it is a reflection on and a description of present noticings. And this gives Wordsworth the opportunity to meditate on memory and how remembering a place and then going back to it kind of highlights and stirs up within us our own understanding of ourselves over time. And this is something that Wordsworth in particular is very interested in. What has time done to us? The significant moments of our lives that really shaped us. Many years on, when we think about those, how does remembering them and meditating on our change in that past moment, how does that change us in the present? Something that's very fascinating to Wordsworth. And I think he draws out the fascination of it through his language. The day has come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits amid the woods and copses lose themselves, nor with their green and simple hue disturb the wild green landscape. He's used wild twice. He can get away with it. He separates it by a number of lines. But this sort of next section of I'm doing another thing again that I've done before, this again repose under the dark sycamore, it gets even more lush in its description. Earlier on, we had mountain springs, inland murmur, steep and lofty cliffs. Some detail, but not a lot. Now we're getting into the more granular detail. Dark sycamore, orchard tufts, unripe fruits, green and simple hue. His noticings are becoming more precise and more detailed. And then finally we have this wonderful kind of almost hesitant language. It's almost like he's not sure how to describe what he's going to describe next. He says, once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild. He allows us to see him trying to figure out how to describe it. It's hedgerows. Well, it's not even hedgerows. It's little sportive wood run wild. I love this because it's almost like we're hearing a man talk to us and correct himself, and yet it's in this perfect iambic pentameter. These hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild. It's wonderfully rhythmed, and yet it mimics self-correction. It mimics almost, you say something and you think, well, no, that's not quite it. It's something that the Romantics do that has been done before. Gerard Manley Hopkins does this in Wreck of the Deutschland. He corrects himself. He says, I'm not sure how to say it. T.S. Eliot will do this. But these are later writers. Wordsworth is kind of giving an example of how to do this. And then Wordsworth moves into reflecting on what these scenes have been to him in the meantime. And I want to spend the next video talking about how this noticing of nature, which we would expect from romantic poetry, leads into a meditation on the nature of the human self, what the soul is, what life is really about, and how human relationships really make life worth living. That'll be next time. Thanks for hanging out with us to talk about Tintern Abbey, perhaps one of the most perfect poems ever written in the English language.